In this video we're going to take a look at some of the main tools that you'll be using for the woodwork course. Now the first thing that we're going to take a look at here is the workbench. Now there's a number of these in the room and they're made of solid hardwood. These are one of the most important things that you'll use because they help you in many ways to do your projects. The workbenches have they've got two bench vices, one on either side. Now the bench vice lets you hold a piece of wood, your workpiece, firmly and makes it more secure and stable when you're working on it. Any effort that you're making to try and hold a piece of wood still while you work on it is wasted effort that distracts you from what you're supposed to be doing. So it's best if you can have them to hand. Now each of these work boxes, one of the toolboxes that you're going to see here, has your basic kit and the most commonly used tools. You'll see your tenon saw, which is this brass backed saw we'll talk about more in a minute. You're going to see the mallet, the tri-square, which is a very common tool for marking out, as is the marking gauge that you'll see here. Now we're going to take a look at marking out tools. First of all, most importantly, you have your steel rule. Now this marks in millimeters and the course works almost entirely in millimeters. You won't work any other way. Your tri-square, this allows you to draw 90 degrees to an edge and get a perfect straight line with that. Now we're going to look at your marking gauge and your mortise gauge. Now these tools let you draw perfect lines and repeat the same measurements over and over once you set them up. The marking gauge has got a single pin at the top called the spur, and we set the distance between that and the blocky section called the stock by using the adjustment nut that you can see there. Now the mortise gauge has two of those pins, which lets you do a double line, and you can also change the distance between those pins by sliding the little adjustment up and down the stem. Now they're very useful tools and you will rely on them a lot. We've also got your marking knife, which is a little more accurate than a pencil but can't be rubbed out, and your broad awl, which lets you mark a little pilot hole. Now that pilot hole lets you line up your drill more accurately when you go to drill in a hole. Now we're going to look at saws. The main ones here, you've got your tenon saw, that's your brass backed one. It's a bit more rigid and it's got a bit of weight to it. It's very good for doing accurate straight lines. The second one there with the frame is your coping saw. Now the blade can be rotated in that frame and that lets us cut curves, it lets us cut complex shapes. Now your crosscut saw here, this one has about 8 TPI, teeth per inch, so they're quite close together. That lets us cut quite accurately. The second one here is a rip saw. Now that's got less TPI, so it's for heavy duty work. Now that's about 4 TPI. Okay, now we're going to take a look at chisels. Now these are one of the most commonly used tools for making joints. The first set here we're going to look at bevel edge chisels. Now a bevel edge chisel has an angled or beveled outside edge. Now that lets you access more awkward little spaces. Now the larger handled one that we're about to see here, this one is your mortise chisel. Now it's got a bigger handle because this one's for digging quite deeply into the wood to cut out mortise joints. Now that obviously means that it has to be a little bit more sturdy and a bit firmer. It's going to get thumped a bit more with that mallet. As you can see on there, it's got a masking tape on the blade. Now usually the masking tape there just lets us know how deep we're cutting our mortise, and it's helpful to know when to stop. So the masking tape tells us that. The last two at the end here, you've got a couple of firmer chisels, like a bevel edge chisel but straight edges, so quite good for getting into the awkward little nooks and crannies. And you would use these with a wooden mallet. Next we're going to take a look at planes. Now we've got a number of planes that you'll use in the woodwork shop, and they all have a slightly different use. Now the little one that you can see there first is called a block plane, and that's quite good for fine detail, and in particular very useful for putting a chamfer on the edge of a piece of wood. The two next to it are the most commonly used ones. You've got your smoothing plane, which is the slightly smaller one, and the longer one is the jack plane. Next to that, you've got the spoke shave, and then you get into your more specialist things, your hand router, your plough plane, and your rebate planer. Now we're going to just take a look at the regular planes first. Now, they've all got several different components. Now, you're going to see on there you've got the base of the plane, or the foot. We can take the plane apart and you'll be able to see in the inside there you've got the blade itself. Now, in the smoothing plane here you've got several components. The bit on the top here is your lever cap, and that holds the blade in place. You've got your next two sections here which are attached together. You've got your cap iron, which is the bit on top that holds it in, and then you've got the actual cutting iron, or the blade, at the bottom there. Now, obviously that needs sharpened quite regularly. You've got a couple of other sections in there that we'll maybe talk about in more detail when we're doing this in person. Now, as you can see, we'll just reassemble that one and move on to the jack plane. Now, we'll take a quick look at the two adjustments you can make to a planer. You have the little brass handle on the bottom there, which lets you adjust how deep the blade is going to cut, how much it's protruding from the base. And you've got the adjustment lever at the top there, which lets you adjust the angle of the blade. So say you want one side to pop out more than the other, you can do that with the adjustment lever there. Okay, next we're going to have a look at some of the specialist planes. You'll see this one that we're about to pick up here, like we say in the spoke shave. This is a little different. This one lets you cut a curved section using a drawing method by pulling the blade towards you. You're going to find your next one here, your rebate planer. Now, the rebate planer lets you cut down to a set depth, and we set the depth using the section on there at the side, the depth stop. And you're also going to see you've got a fence. Now that bit, whenever you stop a piece of movement with a little adjusting thing like that, it's usually called a fence. A similar thing on the plough plane, except it's got a much finer blade. Now the plough plane is designed to cut grooves into a piece of wood to, say, slot a base for a drawer or something like that in, where a rebate planer is going to take out a larger section. The last little one there is a hand router. Now it's got a flat base, and the blade can be, the depth of the blade can be adjusted using the handle at the top. Now this one's very useful for clearing the bottom of a slot down to a particular level and giving you a tidy flat finish. So a very useful tool for doing, in particular, housing joints, which we'll talk about joint types in a later video. Now up next we're going to take a quick look at files and rasps. Now these are tools that are generally used for shaping. Let's say we talked a little bit about the spoke shave just there. A file is a very useful way to tidy up a curve or the inside of a slot, for example, depending on what you're doing. Now we've got a couple of examples there. You've got a flat file, which is a bit more of a square edge on that. You've also got a half rounded file. Now they do different things. A rounded file is better for doing curves. You've also got a range of detail files, which are all slightly different shapes. This one, for example, is a triangular one. The other two tools that we've got there are rasps. Now this one, as you can see on there, has got much more texture to the surface. It's got raised points, and this lets you really carve up quite a lot of material quite quickly. Now this one's a Stanley Sureform rasp, and it's almost like a cheese grater. The amount of cutting that can do, it can really take a lot of material out of wood very quickly. Next we're going to take a quick look at hammers. Now other than the one that you'll be used to seeing at home, which is your claw hammer, these are the two that you'll see most commonly. You've got a cross peen hammer there, that's the pointed section at the back. Now generally if you're starting off a panel pin or something small like that, you would use the back of that because it's a little bit smaller, a bit more detailed. You've got a ball peen hammer in the centre, and probably most importantly on the other side there you've got a wooden mallet. It is not called a hammer, that one is a mallet, and don't get that jumbled up, okay, because they do very different jobs. You would never nail anything in with a mallet. In this next section we're going to take a look at cramps. I'm very specifically saying cramps, C-R, not clamps. Generally speaking, we would use a clamp in metalwork and a cramp for woodwork. The red one that you can see there is a G cramp, and the adjustable one with the black section there is an F cramp. Obviously, they're getting that from the shape of them. The other ones you'll come across quite commonly in the woodwork shop are this longer one here, the sash cramp. Now this was done for doing larger frames like sash windows. You can see it's got an adjustable stopper, and then you've got a section that you can tighten to hold things in place. You'd usually use 2 or 3 of those on a larger frame. This one you'd use when you're using the drill. This is a drill press vise. This lets you hold a piece of wood quite firmly while you drill into it. Now the last one here is a little bit more specialist. We're going to be looking at this one. It's a web cramp or ratchet strap cramp. You've got 4 little sections there. Each of those has got a 90-degree corner on it, and you use the web or the band of this cramp to hold them all together. And you can see there you tighten up by using the little ratchet motion on the section there, which then kind of pulls the material tight and holds it in place. You'd use this for doing a larger section, and again something that's maybe a little more awkward. Okay, we're going to take a little look at a specialist saw as well just now. Now this is what's called a miter saw. Now what you're going to see there, the little blue section at the bottom, is the framework. Now that is where you can hold the piece of wood quite steadily. You'll see as well there's a little yellow button there which lets you adjust the angle that the saw sits at in the frame. Now say for example you need something cut to an exact 45-degree angle. You would set that little yellow adjustment handle to 45 degrees. You would fit your piece of wood up against that fence, and then you would put your saw blade in, and that would let you cut at an exact 45 degrees every time. Now that miter saw lets us cut miter joints, and we'll talk about miter joints later on. Okay, we're going to take a little look at glass paper. Again, very specifically saying glass paper, not sandpaper, which most people would call it. Historically, when it was first made, it was just sand glued to paper, which is where the name came from. But nowadays, we'll use glass paper because it's crushed glass glued to paper. The first thing you saw there was a sanding block. It's just a little wooden frame that holds the piece of sandpaper in place, makes it easier. You've got 3 types here that we're going to be using. You've got coarse, which has got quite rough grains of glass on it. You've got medium, and then you've got fine. It's all just about how smooth the surface is. And you work through those grades, so you start with coarse, then medium, then fine to get the best finish on your piece of wood. But always with the grain on the wood. That gives you the best finish. Now the first screwdriver you see there is a Phillips head screwdriver. It's got a little cross on the top, and that's for more modern kind of cross head screws. The one next to it with the green handle is a straight head screwdriver or slotted screwdriver. That's maybe a little more old-fashioned. You're also going to see a countersink tool. Now that lets you chamfer the edge of a drill hole so that you can fit the screw in and sink it to the surface. And the last one there is a center punch, which just lets you mark in a little point that you can start drilling. Quite useful for getting your drill lined up accurately. We're going to take a look at the cordless drill now. This is very useful for drilling holes, but also for fitting screws, depending on what thing you fit into the chuck on the top, whether that's a drill bit or a screw bit. You can see the trigger there, and above it the forward and reverse handle. That changes the direction that the chuck turns. And you'll see there as well the torque selection switch. Now when I switch that right down, there's not a lot of force behind the drill, so it's going to stop your screws from getting threaded. But if I turn that right up to the drill setting, it's very strong. I'm really struggling to stop that from spinning. The battery comes out at the bottom, and you'd fit that into the charger to charge up once you're done using. We'll look at drill bits now. These are your standard drill bits, twist bits they're called. You can see they're quite straight, but they do have this twisted profile and a slightly pointed end. You'll use them quite commonly for most things. Other than that, we'll look at a few more specialist ones. These brass ones are called Forstner bits. Now, they're quite wide, and they'll let you do a wide, flat bottomed hole. They've got a pin in the center to guide them, but mostly it's these arms around the edges that do most of the work. Now, the last set that I've got for you there are hole saws. Now they've got a little drill bit that goes in the center that guides it, but the actual hole saw is this part here. Now you can see it looks a lot like saw teeth on the outside, and that's where the name comes from. Now that lets you do quite wide holes, but again, different to a Forstner bit, they don't have a flat base. They go right the way through if you're drilling through a panel, for example. We'll go into more depth about how you use these tools and what you use each of them for as we go on with these videos.